Hello and welcome to the eOrganic webinar on using NRCS conservation practices to transition to organic by David Lamm of the Natural Resources Conservation Service. My name is Alice Formiga and I'm the webinar coordinator for eOrganic. eOrganic is the organic agriculture community of practice with e-extension. We are a community of cooperative extension service personnel, researchers, ag professionals, organic certifiers, and practitioners. You will be able to find the recording of this webinar, information about our upcoming webinars, as well as articles, videos, and more by going to our website at www.extension.org/organic_production. We are very pleased to have David Lamm as our speaker today. David has worked for the NRCS for over 33 years, starting as a soil conservationist and district conservationist in Northeast Indiana. In 2002, he moved to Georgia as the Assistant State Conservationist for programs overseeing all conservation programs for the state. While in Georgia, David began working with organic producers to help them solve resource problems on their farms. In 2008, he took a job at the East National Technology Support Center, working on organic farming-related issues for the agency. He has spent much of the past year helping develop the Conservation Stewardship Program. In this webinar, he will discuss how organic producers can benefit from NRCS conservation practices, along with some of the conservation financial assistance programs that are available. Okay, now I'll hand things over to you, David.
Thanks, Alice. I appreciate the opportunity to be with everybody this afternoon in this medium of electronic education here. I'm sitting here in sunny Greensboro, North Carolina, and suspecting that most of the producers around here are busy and actively engaged in trying to get things ready for the upcoming cropping season. What I want to cover today, I want to talk about NRCS and organic farming, and I don't know how many of the listeners have had an opportunity to try and work with our folks across the country, but maybe explain a little bit about that. I want to talk a little bit about the way we think as an agency. NRCS, our planning process, which definitely influences how we interact with each other. I want to talk about our conservation practice standards, what they are and why we have them. And then I want to close and spend most of the time on talking about those practices that we have that address conservation resource issues and may help folks transition to organic or can be applicable on their individual farms there. What is organic farming? If you had gone in, and when I started this job I'm in right now about a year and a half ago, I asked that question and it kind of come up with a view of our agency. I think a lot of our field office folks would have listed now they're people who don't use fertilizers or pesticides. They have weedy fields. They generally have poor quality produce or products, excuse me, and then there's really no way we're going to feed the world using an organic agricultural system. So it's a pretty dismal view of things, but I think as we kind of evolved and understood what's going on, we recognize now that organic farming is really a highly sophisticated farming system. You know, to try and use your management skills to provide those necessary inputs of nutrients and weed control without artificial or synthetic materials takes a degree of knowledge and experience that most producers probably don't have that are farming conventionally. You have a keen knowledge of what you're doing, definitely have a market insights that I think a lot of conventional farmers don't. And I think a lot of farmers are looking at organic to diversify their farming interests to make sure that they can even stay afloat. So and the other thing I think we discovered as we've started to work with the organic community is that you take advantage of technological advancements to reduce your labor needs and improve yields and the quality of the products, just like a conventional farmer would, but you're more targeted in the technology that you're taking advantage of. And you know, we've been trying to convey that fact to our producers. You know, if you look at the organic trends, and I know I might be talking to the choir here, so to speak, but you know, this is nothing you folks don't already know. From 1995 to 2005, you look at the ag census data every year, the acres of crop and pasture land and rangeland under organic production has seen going up. You know, you can see right now there's almost, and this is old data, 2007 census data, it's not the newest stuff out there, but you can see there's, you know, almost 2.8 million or 6 million acres in production of cropland or total acres, of which about 1.3 acres organic cropland and almost 1 million acres of pasture. So it's a viable agricultural interest, and I think that's something that we didn't recognize as an agency. We didn't realize that over almost $2 billion are sold annually, the value of the sales off of organic production, which is pretty amazing. And the other thing is, I think when we look at this top 10 states in the country, had you asked NRCS a year ago or 2 years ago, you would have, yeah, California might have been in there, but I don't think we would have thought Montana, Texas, Wisconsin would have been the number fallen in line as the top 10 states in total organic acres in the country. I think that was something that probably caught us by surprise, and it indicated to us that it's more than just vegetable production going on out there, that it has gone into areas where we feel more comfortable with the normal grain production, you know, corn, peanuts, cotton, that type of thing. So why do we have the increase? I think as I've been around in my job here for a year or so, I see an interest in food safety. People don't want some assurance that their food is free from residual pesticides. They really like the concept of locally growing. Here in North Carolina, when I moved here, I was really surprised at the farmer markets that are set up and folks that participate in them. They like the community support agriculture. They like the idea of green food being produced. And somehow or other, the idea that we've been advocating through conservation has not been perceived to be that way, whereas organic production systems have been. And then I think the basic idea of farmers are trying to survive in this current market. So if you look at what's going on, I think all this background led to quite an influence in the Farm Bill that was passed in 2008. If you do a Google or just go and do a word search on the word organic, and you're going to find it in the Farm Bill mentioned. I think I did that once when I first started. It's like 60 or 70 times. And there's quite a few emphasis areas, such as the Conservation Reserve Program. It was charged by Congress to allow the organic certification process to begin 1 year before a contract terminates. So that was something that wasn't there before. There's a new initiative called the Cooperative Conservation Partnership Initiative, which is a program that my agency is responsible for. And one of the key components of that is to promote innovative practices and delivery methods, including organic production. So those partnerships are to develop. That's one of the focus areas that they would be selected on. If you go to AMA, they were told that spend 10% of the funds would be used to help support organic certification. And if you look at the various loan programs throughout the Farm Bill, there's a lot of opportunities to loan for organic production systems. But for specific to the NRCS, we were given 3 charges. One, we're looked to incorporate organic production into our conservation practice standards, the subject of today's top webinar. We're supposed to have reviewed our practices to make sure that what we're promoting for conservation is inclusive of organic production and doesn't, and if it does contain something within the practice standard that would prohibit its use by organic producers, then to look at what we can do to eliminate that obstacle. The second thing we were told directly in the Farm Bill was to ensure that adequate technical assistance is available. Technical assistance is a district conservationist, a soil conservationist at the field office level, being able to come out and work with you one-on-one to write a conservation plan that I'll describe here in a little bit on your farm. And then the last thing was to make sure our conservation programs meet the specific needs of organic producers. I was telling Alice before we came on, that's been one of the tasks I've been doing, is trying to make sure that the newly introduced Conservation Stewardship Program is accommodating to organic production systems. Of course, Jim Riddle from Minnesota gave a presentation on their EQIP Organic initiative. You folks probably know about that. Within the Farm Bill, there's very specific criteria put in there related to how organic producers can use EQIP. And you can see the limitations there. You're supposed to be able to get up to $20,000 a year, $80,000 for the life of the Farm Bill, and it's targeting those producers who are transitioning to organic and with this specific initiative. So you can see that Congress was really trying to help farmers move from conventional farming into organic production systems. What you're probably less familiar with is the Conservation Stewardship Program, which I mentioned. And if you read in the Farm Bill itself, it talks about Congress wants this to be a transparent program that encourages transitioning while participating in a contract. So the idea is to develop a program that a producer can sign a CSP contract to begin the certification process, transitioning, and when the contract's over, they would be have met the obligations of the National Organic Program and be able to have a an OSP and be certified organic. What this entails is how we use what's called a conservation measurement tool. That's how we evaluate applications. And then one of the things is to make sure that we offer enhancements or practices that are encouraging to or specific to organic production, which has been something I've been involved with. Okay, here's a definition. And what I want to try and emphasize here is if you look at this definition of organic farming, it's a production system that is managed to respond to site-specific conditions by integrating cultural, biological, and mechanical practices that foster cycling of resources, promote ecological balance, and conserve biodiversity. That's straight out of the NOP, and that's the definition of organic farming. But if you look at this definition, this is straight out of the NRCS Conservation Planning Manual, and we're talking about a sustainable agriculture. And I'm not going to read this entire thing, but what you'll see is there is a lot of commonality between what our agency has been advocating for the last 50 years in organic farming. You know, the idea to long-term stability of agricultural enterprise, soil conserving cultural practices, soil fertility programs, and pest management practices. You know, in the last bullet there, the goal of sustainable agriculture is to minimize the adverse impact to the immediate and off-farm environment while providing a sustained level of production and profit. You know, I think that what we've probably been promoting, and much to the surprise of many of our employees, is many philosophies that will parallel with organic farming production. So let's talk a little bit about when an NRCS person comes out to your farm, he's been trained to go through a 9-step planning process. And he may not go through this, you know, like with step 1, step 2, 3, but in the background, in his mind, when they're walking the farm, this is what he's thinking. Well, the first thing he's doing is identifying your resource problems and opportunities to improve them. And this is pretty important because we're not necessarily, as an agency, responsible to help for production side of things. We recognize production helps farmers stay in business. But what we're out there is what kind of resource problems do you have? Is it soil erosion? Is there soil quality problems? Is your farm contributing to some kind of water quality issues on farm or off farm? You know, what about your livestock? You know, or your animals, whether it be wildlife or livestock, your plants, is there any indicator of invasive species, or maybe your soil condition is, gives an indicator of poor soil quality because of what's going on out there. We look at air, and then a new one we're looking at is energy. So in the background, they're walking around the farm, and they're kind of doing these inventory of ideas there. The second thing is hopefully they're discussing things with you as the producer. What's your objectives? You know, what are you trying to accomplish? What would you like to see this place look like in the next 5 or 10 years? Help you develop a strategy to make sure you have a sustainable farm and something that's going to, you know, improve those resource concerns. And also they're going to be looking at the capabilities. You know, you look around, you can see a farm, and you can kind of judge, all right, if the equipment's all run down, then maybe that would help, you know, suggest certain practices that could be done versus others. Of course, they rely on inventory tools such as a soils map, aerial photography, topographic maps as they develop alternatives. You know, after they analyze what's going on, what kind of erosion rates you might have, what's the soil conditioning on your farm, looking at the soil quality, those types of things. Then they're going to start to formulate some ideas and then discuss them with you as the producer. And then the 7, 8, 9, what you're going to do as a producer is make a decision. You're going to schedule a conservation, develop that in a plan, write it in a schedule. It tells me I'm going to implement this practice in the fall of 2010 or the spring of 2011, that type of thing. Our conservation planning process or conservation plan is similar to an organic system plan, which I'll show you here in a second. But it's at this point that we hope folks start to seek financial assistance. And the only reason I bring this up is we've gotten into the mode of, we announce a program sign up, people come in and they sign up from a list of practices, and we tend to over or skirt around the planning process. And you have folks signing up for practices that really aren't something that they can do on their farm, or they really don't fully understand what it is that's the expectation, nor does it necessarily improve the resource conditions on their farm. And that's I guess we're kind of a victim in the sense of the amount of money that Congress has started to pump into conservation over the last several years. Of course, hopefully you implement the plan. At that point, we complete a design, you install it, and then we hopefully do a follow-up to see, gee, did that waterway we put in meet the need, or did that conservation cropping sequence? So again, the only reason I bring this up is that that's the thought process that the thousands of conservationists across the country are going through when they're visiting your farm. Ultimately, we have, hopefully it ends in a conservation plan, which just is basically a record of your decisions as a producer and all that supporting information that describes how you're going to protect your resources, how you're going to make sure you ensure soil quality is increasing, or erosion is reduced, or you're not contributing to an off-farm water quality issue. You're going to have a schedule of activities. Within the conservation plan, there's going to be a description of what the conservation practices are. And I'll talk about those more in a minute. And then there should be some supporting information, such as a soils map, a farm plan map. There should be some job sheets in there to describe in more detail what a producer is going to do and how you might implement this practice. If you look at the requirements of an organic system plan, it's real similar. You're supposed to have production frequency or practices, just frequency and the maintenance of what you're doing out there. Track your substances used, you're monitoring what you're doing, you're keeping records, and you're supposed to have a strategy to maintain organic integrity, mainly for prevent commingling and contamination, especially on those farms that have both conventional and organic production. This is a typical conservation plan map, which I think is something that we've got good capabilities with the aerial photography that we get. Usually it's updated every other year or so. We can do some pretty exact field measurements. We outline the fields. We identify where conservation practices are going, where critical areas are, where buildings are, that type of thing, which fits right in line with the requirements of an organic system farm plan map, which you're supposed to have a map that shows the field numbers, where any kind of greenhouse or those types of units are, buildings, roads, etc., hydrologic features such as wells, rivers, etc., field boundaries, buffer zones, and contiguous non-crop areas such as the woods or range. So that's exactly the type of things we do. So I guess there's an interest to have certain groups would like to have NRCS more involved, or have our conservation plan help not fulfill all the requirements from our organic system plan, but help to meet certain requirements so that for farmers who have a conservation plan, maybe they might be able to reference that rather than going through the effort of developing a separate plan on its own. That'll take some effort to get that through, but it's something that folks are working on. Well, let's talk a little bit about an NRCS Conservation Practice Standard. What is the purpose? We have, there's like 150 different conservation practices out there, and what the standard does, it provides the criteria, the minimum criteria needed to determine if the conservation practice has been properly designed and implemented. When you go out and we identify a resource problem, you have a soil erosion problem, it's good to know when you look at the standard, say, gee, this is what you have to do to install this practice properly to make sure that when the practice is done, the erosion problem is gone or the water quality issue has been addressed. It ensures that the resource concern has been addressed and the problem solved. Our conservation practice standards go through a very thorough peer review, and I mentioned earlier in my presentation that Congress told us to review our practices, and after that was passed in the summer of 2008, we did a real quick review and basically gave ourselves a pass, but I'm not sure that was a high quality review. And recently we have been going through a more detailed review, and outside interest groups like the National Sustainable Ag Coalition and others like that have commented on our practice standards, made some suggestions on where changes could be made to make sure they're more inclusive. And maybe the idea that you even just point out within this, if you read the standard that there we have, the way it's written, you can have an emphasis or special consideration for organic production systems, just to emphasize that certain things and certain practices need to be addressed. But our practice standards are written for a wide range of folks, and there can be some conflict with the National Organic Program rules, regardless of the review process. And that's something I'll give you an example of. If you look at our standard, you look at a fence there. What a fence does, it's designed to control the movement of animal and people. Well, that's pretty obvious. The standard talks about the materials, the type, and the design of the fence must be of high quality and durability. So we want to make sure that when we build it, it's going to last, it's going to control the movement of animals and people, and it's going to be around a while. And also within the practice standard, it's going to talk about the height, the size, the spacing of the post, and the type of materials used that would help us meet that high quality and durability criteria of the practice standard. And you can just see some examples where you got different types of fences and out across the landscape there. But where we run into some conflict, we like treated lumber as an agency. We've used treated lumber not only in this particular practice, but also in some other ones, such as some of our animal waste facilities and that type of thing. And so we would, when you review that practice standard, we would not necessarily encourage its use, but well, I guess we probably would. I know a lot of our field office people would. But what we find out is an inconsistent interpretation by certifying agents. When I got into this new position, the use of treated lumber was something that came right to the front because we're cost sharing on or helping to pay for fences being installed, and then we find out that we're putting people out of potential violation there. But then when I sent out a solicitation of the certifying agents in the East region here that I work in, you know, I got 13 responses, and I got 7 different interpretations ranging from thou shalt not have any fence posts to, well, we'll let you have them as corner posts, or as well, you can put a hot wire on both sides to keep livestock. So that really causes an agency like ours, who's used to measuring quantity, you know, down to the finite nut and bolt, that causes us a lot of heartburns and some growing pains we're going to have to go through to help ensure that what we do meets the standards in both agencies. Now let's talk a little bit about conservation practices that help you as an organic producer or someone who's trying to transition. What I want to do is look at the individual requirements within the NOP and then reference practices that we would have that might help you meet that transition into that and meet that standard within the rule. As far as I understand in the NOP, there's basically 2 requirements for land. One is that prohibited substances be applied for the 3 previous years. Well, that's pretty obvious. We don't really have a conservation practice that would help do that. I mean, that's just a waiting period where you're learning how to farm organically, you're keeping records, but we don't really, that's not really addressing the resource concern that we wouldn't necessarily recognize. But the second one there is you have the distinct defined boundaries and buffer zones. Well, we've got all sorts of buffering practices out there that would help, that could be installed while you're going through this transitioning process. You know, the most common one down here would be a filter strip, which is, you know, something that's real common in the Midwest where I'm from. Nice wide grass buffer strip there. You got the cropland there. You got an open ditch there. Water runs across, so get some filtering action there. That's a real common one, and there's a lot of opportunities to get that type of thing installed. Another one would be a field border, you know, where you're establishing a buffer area as a zone between fields, between you and your neighbor. What you plant this with is, you know, we recommend, you know, generally a mix of grasses and forbs. You know, we don't have any restrictions on the types of materials used, whether it be certified organic or not. That's something that you would have to specify with when you're working with your NRCS person which ones you're wanting there. But these would be great areas for pollinator habitat, be for beneficial insect habitat, could be established in these areas and along there. Now, one thing I will say is we're an agency, we like to measure things. We have very exact widths, like on this filter strip down here. For water quality purposes, most states would run 25, 30 foot in width. But we would not know what your certifying agency would require. So you need to be working with them. Say if you're going to use a field border as a buffer zone between you and your neighbor, we may say it only needs to be 30 feet wide. Well, your certifying agent says, well, it needs to be 50 feet or 60 feet. We would have no way of knowing that. Now, we don't have a problem going wider, but minimum widths tend to become the standard in a lot of cases because most landowners aren't willing to give up any more acreage to a buffering area than is required to meet the minimum standard. So if the certifying agent is going to request a wider field border or a hedgerow, which again is a planting of shrubs and bushes between fields or between you and the neighbor, then we would need to know that to work with that. And then we have riparian forest buffer would be another practice where you're planting trees adjacent to a water body such as a stream that provides habitat and certain other environmental benefits. Now getting into specific crop production standards, the NLP talks about soil fertility and crop nutrients, seed and planting stock, crop rotation, crop pest, and wild crop harvest. Of these five, or gets four that are primarily dealing with crop production, the only one we really don't have a practice that would be directly linked to it is the second one there, the source of seeds and planting stock. We're not necessarily interested in the sense of providing has a practice that addresses where ensuring that your seed is certified organic and that type of thing. So that be one of the four that we wouldn't have any practices that met that standard. But when you talk about the others, the soil fertility and crop nutrients, the NLP gives some guidelines that says that the intent is to improve the physical, chemical, and biological condition of the soils. That's something we would agree with wholeheartedly, and also to minimize soil erosion along the way. And I think that's a challenge that in perception that organic producers are going to have to overcome, that we as an agency have been advocating conservation tillage for the last 30 years so heart and soul that the thought of tilling the soil would be almost appalling to some of our people, and I say that lightheartedly. So we need to understand that you can control erosion and through some other methods, but don't be surprised if you go in and work with some of our folks and they kind of look at you kind of funny and say, gee, you're going to till the soil and you call yourself a conservationist. Well, that's because of the effort we've put into the one way. But anyway, there's several practices you can do. Conservation cropping rotations, that's something that we need to refamiliarize ourselves with, because conservation tillage works real good with short rotations. We need to make sure we understand that a long rotation can solve erosion problems too. Cover crops, we've been advocating those real heavily here lately. And the idea of residue management, and I put this slide in there in particular because that's a roller crimper that's used to terminate a cover crop without the use of pesticides. And while that's a very effective tool, that's something that our folks are going to be a little bit unknowledgeable across the country in. And if you talk to them about that, you may be introducing them to some new technology that they weren't there. But again, those are three practices that are available that would meet the NOP requirement as described here. Some other practices, again, I mentioned that we're going to have to go back and rediscover some of our traditional practices, things that as an agency we promoted back in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. Alley cropping, contoured buffer strips was something big. Strip cropping was real big back in that day and age. But the focus that we've put on conservation tillage has tended to gotten us away from these practices. And again, contour farming. One thing, reason I put this picture in here is because when I first started in this job, getting back to that conflict or misunderstanding, I got some mixed messages about the use of plastic in the organic community. And you know, some folks saying it was okay, and other folks saying, well, you can't do that. So again, that's something that we need to continue to work on to make sure we have a clear understanding of what the practice are. In addition to the mentioned before, the NOP requires that crop nutrients and soil fertility be managed through crop rotations, cover crops, and the application of plant and animal materials such as animal waste and compost. Again, rotations, another practice I mentioned earlier. Waste utilization, how you apply it. You know, we've helped farmers across the country either using an in-gate spreader like that, injectors. Those are things that we've got a lot of experience. We've got a lot of experience storing manure and helping folk, you know, generating storage facilities and composting facilities of manures. Now, one thing that the organic community is bringing to us, and we're having to work with, is the idea of composting organic materials that are not manures, you know, crop clippings, those types of things. That's something new. You know, not that it doesn't work. It's just that we generally compost manure, or we use a lot for composting of dead livestock, chickens, that type of thing. Of course, you folks are familiar with the restrictions on applying animal waste. Again, I mentioned those. Waste utilization, cover crops would be a good one to help minimize that, and then storage of facilities, as you see this dairy lot with an earthen pit that collects the runoff from there. Again, those are practices that you could do to help implement that part of the rule. And again, with the composting, again, here's a good example in this picture. This is all pressure treated lumber, and where we would have to modify our composting facility structure to accommodate that, either through the use of a concrete wall or some other type of material that would not not fall against the prohibited materials list there. But our composting standards and what the NOP, as far as temperatures and time, and that are very, very compatible. To control erosion, other additional erosion controlling practices, you got windbreaks, you got grass waterways, you've got grade stabilization structures or a concrete drop to let the water run off the field and into a water body safely. And this can either be done this method or using a pipe structure, depending on the volume of water. And I show these because I think a lot of times practices get overlooked, and you don't really think about them as you go into a big field like that. And one other thing is you're going to run into some challenges when you go to a seed, a grass waterway, like I'm kind of running my mouse along there. Those are very critical areas. And what we like to do is get something to get greened up as quickly as possible. We like to see vegetation there yesterday if possible. Of course, it's not. So our seeding recommendations tend to be very aggressive because we've just spent a lot of time and effort designing a channel for water to run through. And as much as we can control things, we can't control when rain comes. And unfortunately, we've had bad experiences over the years with just designing and building a grass waterway and get washed out by the nearest rain. Rain comes the next day. So again, we need to work with the organic community to come up with some aggressive techniques to make sure that we can get grass established that does not include the use of synthetic materials. We tend to be very aggressive there. All right. Of course, we would recognize these things here that the organic NOP requires. You can't use synthetic materials, no sewage sludge, and of course we're not real excited about burning crop residue either because of that. Related to the crop rotation, you can see what the NOP requires. These are practices that, again, you're seeing a commonality of the cover crops used a lot, strip cropping could be used a lot, conservation cropping rotation would be something that would all help to meet this criteria. Now, one thing I will say, we will not have the expertise that in developing a rotation to balance nutrients, pest, and that type of thing that the organic community might need. I think don't hesitate when you're working with an NRCS person to work with them, because we're used to balancing a rotation that mixes different crop families, but we're more and we look at high residue versus low residue and that type of thing. But beyond that, knowing which plant to follow, plant after to prevent nematodes or something like that, is something that probably would be beyond the expertise of many of our field office folks. Related to the NLP requirements for pest control, you got crop rotation, nutrient management, those types of techniques are what they recommend. We would have practices such as field border, use of cover crops, and pollinator habitat, again falling into the buffering practices that would be available for that. And again, use of habitat for beneficial insects is something that we're just starting to understand and would probably benefit from input from the specialists from outside the agency on that. The NLP addresses weed problems from mowing, mulching, grazing, hand weeding, etc. This would all be part of an integrated pest management standard, which we're getting ready to release a new one, where we look at prevention, avoidance, monitoring, and suppression, and use of cultural methods such as cover crop. Again, a lot of commonality, and these would be the two practices that would help meet that need. NLP requires that practices suppress the spread of the disease, and the use of non-synthetic biological, botanical, or mineral inputs can be done. These are the practices that can be, you could use those concepts in. Again, the rotation, cover crops, field borders, and pest management. We don't really work a lot with the wild crop harvest, but you can see other than through timber stand improvement and that type of thing. I'm going to, and I got just a few minutes left here. The NLP doesn't talk about water conservation, but it does as far as use. But we do a lot of design work on irrigation systems. We're used to working on big center pivots or channel systems out in the West. And our focus is designed to improve water use, make sure it has an efficiency over an older system. We look at trying to find ways to reduce the amount of water, and we like to see a net savings in the amount of water used. One of the challenges we have is deals with size. We're used to, our design criteria calls for us to design a system for the crop that has the highest use. And generally we're working with fields that have one crop per year. Well, a lot of specialty crops might have multiple crops per year, and they might have multiple crops growing right next to each other. So that's been somewhat of a challenge to us to be able to come up with systems that meet the needs of the individuals there. Use of drip tapes, water supply lines, drip irrigation, solid set. These are all systems that are being designed for small-scale farmers that are being used around the country. Of course, we advocate the irrigation water management somehow checking when you might need irrigation. Either going out and just do a basic hand check or getting into some more sophisticated technology like the GIMSA blocks or some of the other technology we have there, but just trying to set up a system of not just turning on the water, but turning it on when the plant needs it, matching the water needs to the soil water holding capacity to the crop being grown. When you look at the organic livestock production standards, you can see them listed here. From a production side, we don't really address several of them. We can work with folks when it talks about the 2 out of the 4. I'm going to skip over this slide here, where we talk about the livestock health and care and living conditions are the ones that we as an agency have practices that would suitable or help meet those conditions. We don't really do a lot with origin livestock or the livestock feed itself. When you're looking at health and care, the NLP requires that establish appropriate pasture conditions to minimize spread the disease and parasites, and allow for exercise, freedom of movement, that type of thing. Again, fencing, pasture planning. Again, you work with us, make sure that we have certified organic seed. And then we've really been promoting the use of rotational grazing over the last 10 or 12 years, working up a system, where you can have an intensive grazing system and graze it down to a certain level, then you move them out into another paddock or another pasture. Again, those are all practices that we have available. These would also apply to access for pasture for ruminants and temporary confinement. We have systems where we do heavy use areas where you tend to have a congregation. You might put a bale of hay there. You have a watering trough. Those tend to get tromped down. That's a common practice where we go in and put down a barrier, some kind of synthetic barrier along with a stone or something to keep it from becoming eroded, and allows you to be able to, or becoming a mud hole more than likely, and it allows you to scrape the manure. Or you can go up to something as intensive as a winter feeder that provides a more permanent feeding area, watering area in sensitive areas adjacent to a stream or something like that. Other practices, watering tanks, heavy use areas I mentioned earlier. Cross fencing is another to help split up paddocks so you can control the help rotate them. You can put up a temporary fence, let them graze it there for a day or two. You take it down and you go into some taller grasses there. Of course, you got other watering facilities such as nose pumps to pump water out of a stream or a pond and keep the livestock out of there. We're just starting to get into this whole issue of solar-powered pumps or wind pumps, where without the use of electricity in areas that it's difficult to get there. And then we do a lot of protection of riparian areas or streams, ditches, through such things as fencing along them, exclusion, or also stream crossings are also common practices that are applicable whether you're an organic producer or not. To get more information, you can go to our national website, which is www.nrcs.usda.gov, or if you want to go to your state-specific website, it's the same address, except for you just punch in your state info, whether it be Georgia, be GA, or Alabama, be AL, or whatever, before the nrcs.usda.gov. And what you can find there, you can find your county field office that services there. You can find information related to the conservation programs, the financial assistance programs, the EQIP, the conservation stewardship program, etc. You can also find technical information from the field office technical guide there. You can find our standards and specs for all the conservation practices that I mentioned. And another thing you can find there, you can access to what's called the Web Soil Survey, which is a tremendous tool where you can go in and find your farm on an up-to-date aerial photo, and you can also lay the soils map information on there and get all sorts of interpretations, whether for productivity, for drainage capabilities, for prime farmland designation. There's just a wealth of information that you can get off the Web Soil Survey and do a lot of background work or this inventory work on your own. So I guess that's about all I have for now, Alice, and I'd be open to any questions that folks might have.
Okay, well, thank you very much, David. We now have about 20 minutes for questions. And for those of you who missed the beginning of the presentation, you can use the question box on your screen to type in questions and hit return. If you don't see the question box, you can click the small plus sign next to the word question to open it up. We'll be reading the questions aloud, and David will answer as many as we have time for. This webinar will also be posted on the eOrganic website within the next week in case you missed anyone, would like to hear it again, or you'd like to share it with somebody else. So we do have a few questions. The first was a comment from an Equip Organic Initiative contact in Missouri, and she said that the Equip Organic Initiative is available for both transitioning and certified organic producers. So do you want to talk about that a little more?
Yeah, she may be right on that. I guess I was thinking it was just available for those that are transitioning, but she's probably right with that. Again, check with your local field office. I know that they were, if you're interested, get in there and sign up, because last I heard there hadn't been a run on the money as there had been last year, so I think it'd be a good opportunity. And they made some significant changes, which I'm sure Jim talked about a week or so ago, that made the program a lot more inviting for organic producers this year.
Okay. We have a webinar on the Equip Organic initiative for those of you who are interested on our website, which is under archived webinars. I'll pull up that website on the screen again in a moment while we answer the next question. The next two questions that are coming in are asking for clarification about pressure-treated lumber. Someone wanted to know when you can use pressure-treated post, and he has a large pressure-treated compost facility for horse manure and sawdust, and wanted to know if the only alternative was to take this facility down and rebuild with concrete.
Well, before I would do that, if you're certified organic, you need to get with your certifier, and again, they're the ones that make that determination. But it's, again, I think that's one of the issues that we're having, is that there is a little inconsistency from one certifying entity versus another. That question I asked and got, you can't use it, to, yeah, you can, in certain circumstances. What I would recommend, if, basically what you probably got is a situation where you're, like I showed, where you have the walls have a pressure-treated paneling up against it, you might be able to replace that with something rather than tearing the whole structure down. I think what the concern is to get the potential for or contamination of the manure that's being composted or stored in there by touching the treated lumber. And so I think if you could just remove them treated panels and replace them with something else, if that's what your certifier, again, you need to work with them, would suggest, then there might be some alternatives for that.
Yeah, someone wrote in the comment that you may be able to be grandfathered in. So the next question we had was, in New Hampshire, the pollinator practice requires the use of Roundup, which is NOP prohibited, and wanted to know if this could be waived for transitioners, and I don't think that's possible. Yeah.
Well, I think that, that's, yeah, I mean, this year it might be in there, next year it won't. Again, we're trying to do something, and that's one of those things that there are alternative ways to establish cover, and it may take some additional tillage or timing or what have you, but that's a good example of something we can work on and provide some assistance in coming up some alternative seeding methods. So I guess I would just wait and see and visit with the folks up there and tell them to give me a call, I guess, and we can work around that.
Okay, we don't have any more questions coming in, but we'll just leave a few minutes in case anybody has a question to ask David. Now's the opportunity. You can just type in your question to the question box on the screen and hit return. And I just wanted to also say that I brought up the website on your screen of the eOrganic website, which will have this webinar and a number of other archived webinars available. The address is www.extension.org/organic_production, and on that website you can click on upcoming webinars or archived webinars, or you can see our full schedule, so you can find out about upcoming ones. So yeah, we'll just leave one more minute, and if nobody has another question, we will end the webinar. And I'd like to thank you very much, David, for coming, and thank you all for participating.
Thank you.
Okay. Oh, a question just came in. We're almost done here. We have one more question. You had a few more minutes. Someone wanted to know about working with biodigesters for manure.
You mean as far as related to organic? Or that's a good question. I mean, I'm familiar with the animal waste, and you can get some assistance from the NRCS engineers in your state there. Go to your field office and line that up. I guess I'm a little at a loss. I'm not an expert on those types of things. I think some concerns that might be raised would be, where the manure is coming from that you're putting in there. It's my understanding, and somebody can correct me if they're wrong, is if it's not manure being applied, does not necessarily have to be from organically raised livestock. It can be from livestock that's raised conventionally, but so I'm not sure I said anything, but stumbled around there, to be honest with you. But we do have information on that as an agency on how to build one of those and how to manage it and that type of thing.
Okay, we have another question about hoop structures, whether hoop structures are included in options for the NRCS program, and what square footage should they be?
Well, there's actually a hoop structure initiative going on. I'm not sure if the sign-up is still open or not, but yeah, that's been a new practice that was added late in the eQuip sign-up process, and late meaning a lot of the sign-up has taken place. I think they limited it to one hoop structure. I think it was like 2,500 square feet or something like that. There was a limitation on that for this year. Again, that's a new practice to our agency. We're not as familiar as we probably should be with that, but yeah, you need to go to your local field office and they can help you with that. I think this pilot year the states did have the opportunity to select whether to participate in or not, and I'm not sure 100% of the country did. I know a high percentage, like 40 or so of the states, elected to participate, but basically that's one hoop structure or at that configuration, or possibly two, that you could take advantage of. And these are hoop structures. These aren't greenhouses, and they're very quick. No watering, no electric, none of that kind of stuff is part of the building. They're seasonable hoop houses to extend the growing season. That's the purpose on both ends, to allow production to occur a little longer, that type of thing.
Okay, yeah, we had a comment about manure again, and it can be from any source but not stockpiled and sprayed with a prohibited material, and the NLP lists prohibited materials. We had one more question here concerning the EQUIP program and transitioning clients. Do they have to have an application in with an organic certifier, or do they just have to make contact with the certifier only to begin the process?
You just have to, because takes you 3 years to get certified. I think the goal is to, by the time your contract is up, you would be certified. So you need to have started the process, have a name that you make contact with, and that type of thing. You don't have to be signed up, or because technically, my understanding, the organic system plan doesn't even need to be submitted until you're, I guess, the end of the 3rd year, when you're ready to go through the actual certification process.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I think that's all our questions, and we're running out of time, so thank you all for joining us, and thank you again, David.
Okay, thank you.